Hello and welcome to our class. This is class number 1, and we are going to spend some time talking about what I think are the root of all problems of environmental problems and the root of all solutions, which is environmental economics. I frequently say that there are no such thing as environmental problems, there are only economic ones, and I hope to convince you of that in this short lecture. So let me share my screen and we will go through this. And we are going to use energy as an example because this is a course where we're going to be talking a lot about energy, but you could also look at this from the standpoint of agriculture, food, of minerals, anything that is environmental in nature. So there's some crude oil right here, and this is called oil shale, which is the subject of fracking, which we'll look at in this class as well. So in the example of energy, to understand anything environmental, we have to understand economic systems. And if this were a course that is in class, I would be asking for hands to tell us what the economy is. Invariably, there's someone who's had macro and microeconomics who would answer this perfectly. The answer to this is that the economy, regardless of which country you're in, is a system, I'll add a little bit onto this, of mining, of production of economic goods, of distribution, of consumption, of disposal of economic goods. So it's just a system by which we have things that we buy and throw away. And those are the goods. So economic goods are anything that satisfy people's needs and wants. And it could be, I don't know, it could be this cup, it could be pencil, it could be this little notebook, could be anything. So anything that satisfies people's needs or wants. And you could also put services in here. So for example, tech support or house cleaning. So those are economic services, but they still fall under this economic goods cap. Regardless of where you are in the country, there is a system by which we have our economy go on. And there are two end members or extremes. In reality, most of them fall somewhere in between. The first is called pure market systems, and that is, you may know it as capitalism. And that's where there are decisions that are made in the economic market between buyers and sellers freely with no intervention from government. And so that is, again, one extreme. And economic decisions are just made in the markets. This is a diagram of how this happens. I think you can see my little arrow here. So here we have households, here we have businesses. And in a pure capitalist model, people go from their houses into the businesses to work. And the businesses pay people to do that work. And then up here, you have the households spending money on and in the businesses for their economic goods and services that they purchase and bring to the household. So it's just sort of back and forth way of looking at things in this flow of whether it's goods or products and factors of production and then money. The other type of economic system, and by this is, I mean an end member, is pure command economic systems. And this is what you think of as socialism or communism, where economic decisions are made by the government. The government decides what is created, what is produced, how much of it is produced, how it's produced, who produces it, who consumes it, how much they consume. And so that's this other end member. In reality, most countries have a mix of these two things. So for example, China and North Korea are much closer to the communism method of economic production. And the United States, Canada is much more along the lines of the capitalist model. So these are the two end members again, and there's this mix in most cases. Regardless of whether you're practicing more close to pure command or pure market, there's a flaw here. And this is intrinsic to our course and to the environment in particular, in general. In this picture, here is your economic system. So communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever mix of the two are in here. And you have this production, consumption, and production, consumption. The flaw is that the sphere is too small here. And so what we need to do in our course is to step back a little bit and to realize that the things that go into our goods, our economic goods, all come from Earth. They either destroy, degrade, pollute, or use up our air, our water, our soil, our mineral resources. They can negatively impact ecosystems and biodiversity. And these are, again, most of the things that we use are either non-renewable or potentially renewable that we are now using in a non-renewable sense. And then on the other side, once we mine, produce, distribute, consume, and dispose of things, they're going back into Earth. It's the reservoirs that we need are things like using up metals and minerals, and things like degrading water, air, soil, and polluting them. So what we have to do, it's very simple, however, it's very simple just in theory, is to take a step back and understand that our economic systems operate within the larger context of the ecosphere. And when we do that, all the problems will be solved and we don't even have to take these classes anymore. And I will be happily out of a job. So let's talk about how we do that, because as Annie Leonard said, the devil's in the details. What we have to talk about here is that there is a need and a want and a drive in countries with people to seek economic growth. And with economic growth comes a number of external costs. Economic growth, think about what the economy is. The economy is a system of mining, production, distribution, consumption, and disposal. So that's our economy. So when we grow the economy, what that means is that there's a faster rate of flow through of these materials that we're mining and then essentially dumping. Annie Leonard will tell you that of all of the things that come into a household, your household, within 6 months, less than 1% of them are still there. So it's a staggering amount of throughput. And the better the economy does, the faster we're using up our Earth's capital and the faster we're polluting it. So you see that there's this conflict here. Right now, under our current models, the things that are better for the environment are worse for our economy and vice versa. And it's a problem because all countries and companies seek economic growth. And so we will look at external cost. So I just said this. Economic growth is an increase in the capacity to provide goods and services. We measure them in our country and globally as GDP. Again, if we were in class together, I'd be asking, what is GDP? Gross domestic product. It is the sum total of all goods and services produced within a country's borders. A more accurate measure of this is GNP, which is gross national product, which is GDP, just explained, plus anything that we produce outside of the country, if we're talking about the USA, but under a USA label, a USA company, and the bottom line of the finances associated with that company are back into our country. So we have this sum total of everything that we produce. And so that is how we measure our economy. And you could see that the higher the GDP, the better off we are, say the economists. But environmental scientists like myself, the higher the GDP, I start hand wringing and say, oh no, the economy is growing. That means our Earth is dying. So how do we fix this? Well, let's first look at what goes into and what doesn't, more troubling, go into the costs. In the cost of an item, there are a series of internal costs, which are the costs that you pay for. So here I have a mug and there's coffee in it. And what I paid for, well, my son bought me this for Mother's Day, but what I paid for this mug was, I don't know what he paid, $5, whatever. and I'm sure I paid for it myself. But anyway, he bought this, and that's the ceramic, the porcelain that this was made of, and the glaze, and the ink printing here, and the distribution of this to the store, and then to here, and maybe some marketing costs, and that the shipping costs, etc. So those are the internal costs. There are also a series of external costs. And the external costs are things that are not included in the $5 for this mug. And that would be, for example, mining up the clay. The porcelain clay means potentially that you have stripped off some of the earth. So you've destroyed soil, you have taken biodiversity in that region and plummeted it to zero, because now you've scraped off all of the trees and plants and animals and the microorganisms. And so earth is worse off as a result of that activity. There's a lot of energy involved in this mug because you have to fire the porcelain. And so that energy comes from, if it was made here, it's probably natural gas. It was made in China. Where is this made? I don't know the stickers off. It was made probably using coal. And so there are serious, as we'll see, mining impacts associated with either one of them, certainly more for coal than there is for crude oil. And so the mining impacts and then burning it to create the energy to fire the mug is causing climate change, is causing acid rain, nitrogen oxides going into the atmosphere. I didn't pay for that. My son didn't pay for that when he bought this mug. And so then when I throw this away, now we have landfills on the surface of Earth. He didn't pay for that either. And so there are a series of external costs that are associated with any economic good that's not included in the market price. So that's the limit of these metrics that we use for economic growth. They don't include all of these external costs. We call them externalities. They hide any sort of positive effects, and they allow for the negative impacts on Earth to just be completely disguised. And so I'll go back one for a minute. So let's talk about this. Say you are environmentally conscious and you decide that this mug that I have is not kind to the environment. So you're going to make an equivalent mug and you're going to market it as an environmentally friendly alternative. So what you do is to go farther away and you find a porcelain place where you can mine clay on the bank of a river that you have to be really careful about the water quality, but you're not destroying an ecosystem. And you mine that very slowly and you use intensive recycling. And for your kilns, you have, I don't know, you've set up your plant where you have geothermal energy that is so good that you can use it for electricity for your kiln. So you're not burning any coal or oil or fossil fuels. And the inks that you're using, pigments that you're using here are, there's this really neat thing that I read about recently where they put a cartridge in tailpipes of automobiles and they catch the exhaust. And so not only are you lowering the pollution coming from the car, but also you can then take that cartridge out when it's full and use it as black pigment for dyes, for toners, for this mug. And so you do that, and so you're cleaning the environment while you're getting the black pigment. It's a lot more expensive though. Instead of having this plant be operated somewhere where people don't make a basic living wage, they don't have medical, they don't have dental, they don't have retirement, they don't have childcare, you just make that in somewhere in China in a sweatshop where you can pay them, you know, a third of what you would be otherwise paying people, and then not having to include all of this workman's comp and that sort of thing. So you also are using solar powered cars to deliver these to homes. And you know, you can go on all day about this, but you get the picture. You are going to make an alternative to this mug. This mug is exactly the same, your mug. Quality, it's not that yours is a better quality. It's not that it looks different. It's not that it's bigger or nicer. It's simply that it is done in an environmentally friendly way. So if we were in class, I would ask people, which one of these are you going to buy? And if my 20 years of teaching experience holds up, most people will raise their hand in an environmental science class and say they're going to buy your mug. However, then when I say the second part of it, well, this mug is going to cost $60 and this one costs $5. You have a finite amount of money available to you, and maybe you have enough money that you can afford to buy a $60 mug that is maybe going to break, maybe not. And this isn't too off topic. I could probably even raise the price more. I have a student at Mass Art who is in ceramics and who sells her mugs, which she does in a similar way, for $85, and they're beautiful. And I would really like to buy one, but I can't bring myself to because I have 2 kids and they will break it instantly. So the point here is that when people are out shopping for a mug for their mom for Mother's Day, they're going to buy this one. And so what happens is you go out of business. There went your small business. Even though you have a PPP loan, you're out of business. And so what happens to this company? They get a bigger market share and they do better. And in a capitalist environment and in an economic system, that's all you have to do, is to provide the most amount of goods to your consumers for the least amount of money. It makes your shareholders happy. So how do we fix this? And this is tough. In a class that I teach on agriculture, it is the case that better food is much better for you. So if you have, for example, grass-fed organic cows and you're doing pasture-raised meat or milk versus concentrated animal feeding operations, feeding cows corn, it's ruinous to the earth in so many ways, and there are all these subsidies in those cows. You go to buy this meat, the hamburger or whatever from these cows, which you can't get these days either, is going to be, say, I don't know, I don't buy meat, $3.99 a pound. Does that sound good? And the meat from the cows that are done the right way is $9.99 a pound. However, this is much better for your health. Here's where we're hobbled in the realm of energy. Electrons are electrons. It doesn't matter from where you get them, and you can't even trace them. So if you get that thing in your electric bill saying, hey, pay more for green energy, that's ridiculous. You can't trace electrons. It's just a scam, in my opinion, by the power companies to get even more money, which they don't need because they have lots of subsidies. But I digress. So in terms of energy, which is the example we're using, it doesn't matter which way you do it. And so we end up using coal or fracking or crude oil simply because they cost less, as we'll see. So what can we do about this? All we have to do is internalize the externalities. What does that mean? Well, we say to the company that produced your competitor mug, we see that you've ruined this ecosystem, so we're going to tax you. We see that you're using crude oil to heat your kiln, so we're going to tax you. We see that you are using a dye that is carcinogenic, and then people are going to be having to draw on their health insurance a lot more, so we're going to tax you. So you tax them. In a capitalist model, they have to pass that on to their consumers. And then to your company that you made, we say, oh, we see that you're using geothermal energy. Here, have a credit. We see that you're taking from them and giving to them. We see that you're using this more expensive form of ink, but our skies are all clearer and cleaner because of it, and our health is better. We're going to give you a credit for that. And what happens is when you have the $60 or $80 mug and the $5 mug, and by internalizing the externalities, which is to give your company the credit that it deserves for protecting Earth, and to tax this company because, you know, it's ruining Earth, then it's going to get to a situation where your mug costs less than your competitors, and we're all going to buy your mug. So that's all you have to do. And we will look at that a little bit during the course of the week. But there have been studies and all sorts of studies with this. And what you're looking at here is a study that a group of economists, and we'll get into it, did. And this is our GDP from the 50s to 2000. And you see that it grew steadily. And then there was a group of people who internalize the externalities during this period of time, put in the fact that we are degrading and destroying and using up Earth's natural capital, and you see that we peaked in about the late 60s, and we've been on a downside ever since. So this is something that I'll tell you another coffee example. I don't even drink coffee usually, but when I was doing this in class one day, I was up all night and I was working on a manuscript that I was submitting. I had this fabulous TA, Tommy. He was so great, and he could read my moods and what I needed. And he knew from my emails that I was up all night. And so he came in and he brought me coffee, which I never use unless it's an emergency. And I said, oh my God, Tommy, thank you so much. And then I picked it up and I looked out on the sea of 350 students and realized I'm in an environmental science class. And here is Dunkin' Donuts coffee, really bad for the environment, in a styrofoam cup with a plastic cap, and everyone's looking down at me. So I decided to turn it into kind of a teachable moment. I said, okay, first extra credit exercise of the semester. Internalize the externalities of this coffee mug, do the research, and you can use Microsoft Excel and quantify it, or you can use Word, but tell me how much this coffee should cost. Tell me how much did this coffee cost back then? It was, $3.50 or something for this coffee, or $2, whatever it was. So I said to all 350 students, probably $2, go home and do this. And I got emails all night, but what about this? But what about this? But what about this? And I just kept writing back, do the best you can, do the best you can. And the next Friday, because it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, the students all came in and they were putting their papers on the front little sort of dais and running away because they didn't want to be associated with the work that they put up. And I took those home and I tallied them and came back the next Monday and said, okay, I have the results of your extra credit answer. And everyone wanted to know, what is the right answer? I don't have the right answer, but I gave them a range of what they said. And there were people that said that the coffee should cost about $2, $2.20. So there's that. Guess what the high end was? You'll never guess. You can't guess anyway. This is asynchronous. $8 billion for a cup of coffee. Now, usually the class breaks out into laughter, ha, 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 ha. But it's not something that is funny, because what the exercise tells you is that there are people in the classroom that value an acre of rainforest that will never grow back when you're doing sun-grown plantation coffee. They value that acre of the rainforest and its many ecosystem services a lot more than they value, than others value it. They say, oh, whatever, there's a lot of rainforest. Nobody's right there. This is a value judgment, and who gets to make that value judgment? And invariably, companies will go more towards the $2.20, and people who care about the environment will go towards $8 billion. Obviously, a cup of coffee is never going to be $8 billion, but you get the point that there's this range. And when you internalize the externalities, this is the case that who gets to say how much an acre of rainforest that will never grow back will cost? Who gets to say how much a gallon of crude oil that has been processed by pathways that we'll talk about later will destroy or harm the environment? And that's a lot of that is stuff you can't really walk back from easily. So all we have to do, is to internalize the externalities, and that involves including the externalities in the price. No company under a capitalist model or even a mixed economic system is going to do that of their own volition. So it requires government action. That's why there's no such thing as a pure capitalist environment, of economic system, because we need government intervention. I won't go into the reasons why we have courts and public roads and public libraries and breaking up monopolies and all that sort of thing. So how do we work within economic systems to solve these problems in terms of the externalities? I'm going to show you this graph. I'm going to overlay a couple of things on it. First, here we have a electric manufacturing plant, a power company. So they're producing electricity. And in this power company, there is pollution that's being generated. And so what you have here on the x-axis is the percent of pollutants removed. So you're burning the coal or the natural gas to create electricity. If you don't take any of the pollution out, just let that smoke go out into the smokestack, there's 0. And over here, you take all of it out. So there's nothing going out except maybe some vaporous water. And then on the y-axis, you have the cost per unit of pollutant removed. So down here, if you don't remove any pollution from creating this electricity, it doesn't cost you anything. You move 25%, it's pretty cheap, 50% pretty cheap. And you see that as you go to 100%, it gets really, really expensive to tinker at the margins up there and to take out all of the pollution from the plant. Now we're overlaying on this the green curve, which is the cost to society. And you see that it's really just the inverse of the red line. If you don't remove any pollution, you have a really high cost of to society in terms of getting sick, in terms of the environment being really bad. And as you go down to 75% still high, 50% gets really low, and then 25 and 0% goes down to 0. So you cleaned up all of the pollution. There's no cost to society. Now let's look at this blue line, and you see that the most cost effective, the biggest bang for the buck, as it were, is right here, where the cost is really low, the cost to society is pretty low, and there is so minimal effort for the maximum amount of cleanup. So this shouldn't make you feel very good that half of the pollution that we generate is going out into the atmosphere, because it's just always going and into water and into soil. If it is really, really bad in terms of a pollutant, dioxin, most potent carcinogen known to humanity, then you would go over to better effort, because that has a really high cost to society. So you can, figure this out. If it's carbon dioxide, it's not considered lethal right now, though we'll look at it in the context of climate change, then you could do less. So these curves are made, and it's very deliberate about how much we take out of the pollution that we create through the Environmental Protection Agency. The problem is it is expensive to do this. It is expensive to clean up the environment. And as you know, I'm sure you know, these days, the concentration of wealth in this country and in this globe is such that the poorest fifth of people have only 1% of the resources. And by that, I mean money. And the richest fifth, this is a little bit dated, I think the richest fifth have almost 90%, 86% of the wealth in the world. So it costs money to clean up the environment, and a lot of people don't have money. Again, with this example of the different types of energy. So here is the bottom line with regard to energy. If you have large hydroelectric, which we'll talk about later towards the end of the semester, then it's really cheap, but you can't do large hydroelectric in many places. We don't have rushing waterfalls next to large metropolitan areas. So that leaves things like coal, biomass, which you'll look at, and then geothermal and natural gas. It's cheap. It's really cheap. This lighter color thing is the cost if you have to clean up spills and disasters. So Exxon oil spill or Fukushima here. And as you go up, the cost, solar's coming down, but for now, we'll call it about that. The cost per kilowatt hour of generating this electricity goes way up. And so there you go. There's the story of energy. We use this stuff because it's cheap. Here's the problem. It's cheap because of gargantuan subsidies. We have trillions of dollars annually, globally, going in to subsidize this, and we don't have much in the way of subsidies here. So this is a prime example of how we can internalize the externalities, tax these finite, non-renewable, highly polluting things for the fact that they're ruining Earth. No value judgments on people, just that's what we do. Take that, and certainly take out the subsidies that are incentivizing the unmitigated use of these things and put them to these other methods. Nuclear we'll look at. It's not a renewable energy source, but it's considered an alternative energy source because it's an alternative to fossil fuels. It's a different way to burn, a different way to boil water. That's all it is. And here's the problem, that here we have greenhouse gas emissions, and these greenhouse gas emissions you can think of as a proxy for all pollution. Lignite is a type of coal. And you see that the things that are the cheapest are the most polluting. And this is a range here. And so down here we have things that are the least polluting, and they're the most expensive. You see an easy fix should be emerging in your head. One thing also that is interesting with regard to energy is waste. We waste almost half of the energy that we generate in this country, and it's awful. So these are the inputs in terms of what types of energy we generate. You see fossil fuel, nuclear, and then alternatives. These things all go into our economics and our lifestyles, and half of this almost is unnecessary waste. And then another almost half is unavoidable. So what is that? 18-wheeler goes to Target to deliver bowling balls, I don't know. And then that 18-wheeler has to go back to the plant. We can't just build up a million 18-wheelers at a Target. So that plant, that truck is going back empty. It is wasteful to do that, but there's no way around it. And so then we have useful energy, and then we use a lot of energy to get energy. So that's what this is. So we have a lot of waste. In the interim between when we shift to renewables, we could really address a lot of this and some of this and have the amount of energy that we use in this country by efficiency. So that is a good way to do things. In terms of efficiency, the impact of this cannot be understated. The more efficient we are, the longer we will have to develop a plan. That's really important, to develop a plan for how are we going to move forward with energy in this country. It will also decrease dependence on foreign imports, which we don't do so much anymore, but who knows. Reduces environmental damage, can slow climate change, and it will essentially allow us to save a lot of money. Can you imagine if you cut your electric bill in half? So it saves a lot of money, and it will allow us to shift to renewables a little more quickly. So that's it for the basics of environmental economics. I hope this will be something that you carry forward through the rest of the semester, and you understand that there are no such thing as environmental problems. There are only economic problems. Thank you.